the world changes, the market changes, competitors change, even your own skill sets change. You need to be constantly checking in with those things and kind of revisiting what our strengths and weaknesses are and how that aligns with the market and our customers, because your positioning is a living, breathing thing, and everything's always evolving.
I'm Jonathan Gandalf, and welcome to the Content Cocktail Hour, powered by The Juice. Our mission is to squeeze out the deepest secrets of B2B marketing professionals to help you push your brand to the forefront of the industry. Let's raise the glass. Welcome back to the Content Cocktail Hour. My name is Jonathan Gandalf, founder and CEO of The Juice, and the host of today's episode. I'm thrilled to be joined by Clay Ostrom, founder and brand strategist for Map and Fire. Clay and I met at an event in the spring, and we've stayed in touch ever since then. I've become a big fan of some of the work and research that he does around positioning, messaging, and research for brands. So I'm excited to dig into that conversation today. But Clay, before we do that, in your own words, give us a little bit about your background and your journey to Map and Fire.
Thank you. Well, it's awesome to be here. Yeah, like you said, it was great that we got to connect at Spring just a few months ago, and glad we've been able to stay in touch since then. I'm a fan of The Juice as well. But yeah, Map and Fire, it's a brand strategy agency. We do a lot of, like you said, a lot of research work, a lot of positioning work. We've been around now for 9.5 years, which is kind of crazy for me to think about because it's the longest I've ever worked at any one job. But yeah, we work with founders. We work with a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, primarily work across industries. But yeah, we're big believers in research. That's the key thing. We believe in starting with trying to understand your customers on a deep level, and everything else can kind of like extend out from that. So
yeah, it feels so foundational, and it's cool that you kind of build that foundation with founders. And so I'm excited to learn more about that selfishly a little bit, perhaps. But this is the Content Cocktail Hour, so we do always like to ask our guests before we jump into the meat of the conversation, what's your favorite beverage you're enjoying nowadays?
I'm definitely an iced everything guy in general. I usually start off the morning with an iced latte and then transition into iced tea is kind of my go-to throughout the day. But it's funny, as we were kind of chatting about this podcast and the name of the podcast and the cocktail aspect, I was going to bring up the fact that I got to recently work with a spirit company that was founded by comedian Jim Gaffigan, who launched his own bourbon brand earlier this year. So we got to do some work with that, which was pretty fun. So I also felt like maybe I should have like an old fashioned here, but it's also kind of middle of the day. So maybe it's a little early for that. I got to do some work after this. So I don't think that would be the best decision, but
I always say I do my best thinking personally between drinks 1 and 2, and after 2, I don't do a whole lot of thinking at all. So I would have encouraged that with responsibility, but you don't get to just drop that you worked with Jim Gaffigan on a bourbon brand and us move on from that conversation. Jim Gaffigan, he's a Midwesterner. I believe he's from Indiana originally. I know he actually went to Purdue for a year, which is where I went to school also. Oh. So I am a fan. So tell us more about this bourbon and maybe some of the work you guys did with him.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, he's definitely a Midwest guy. Yeah, I got to work on this because a longtime client that I've had actually went to college with Jim. So after he went to Purdue, he went to Georgetown for a few years, and that's where he went to school with the person I know. And Jim decided he wanted to do this celebrity spirit brand and had a concept in mind. I can't take credit for the core of the genius of what he came up with. But yeah, so he kind of partnered up with this client that I've known a long time he's from Louisville. So he knows the bourbon space really well.
Of course.
And together they, from scratch, just spun up this brand under a year, put it all together. And I actually, I've got a bottle of it here you can check out, but
there you go. If you hear Clay taking any swigs or gulps during the podcast episode, we know what's happening now.
Exactly. If I have to go off camera suddenly for a second, it's just to kind of calm my nerves. But Jim came up with this concept. It's very much a brand about him and his kind of point of view, and kind of connecting it back to the whole positioning discussion. I think part of what made it so successful, in my opinion, is partially the connection to fatherhood. So the brand is called Father Time. To be clear, it's not Father Time. It's not the character Father Time, but it's Father Time. It's like some time for fathers who he would describe as kind of being sometimes the underappreciated hard worker, who kind of like has to suffer in the background a little bit and deserves a break every now and then. I think that's part of the positioning, around fathers specifically, but also being a comedian, it's really infused with his voice and his comedy. And in the spirit space in particular, brands tend to take themselves really seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants to be artisanal and handcrafted, and there's
Exclusive
juniper berries.
yeah.
So I think having a brand that actually has a sense of humor and can not take itself so seriously also really helps to set it apart and give it a unique flavor, so to speak. And yeah, it did really well. They sold out in the first few weeks of their pre-order. And now I will add, and this is a great little tactic if anybody wants to steal this, having a big celebrity attached to your brand, promoting it is a huge gift.
There you go.
Especially one that's doing TV appearances on The Tonight Show and, Seth Meyers and all that stuff helps too. But so anyway, yeah, if you can get a celebrity to help with your brand, I recommend doing it.
Built-in audience and distribution there. That's a lesson for sure for all brands.
Exactly. Yeah.
I shared with you a little bit. I love that story. I've spent some time in the food and beverage space, helped start a craft brewery called Braxton Brewing Company out of Covington, Kentucky, greater Cincinnati. Yeah. And same thing, we kind of came from the B2B marketing space prior to that. And we used a lot of B2B marketing tactics to market to distributors, actually. And that helped us grow. And then our brand was based on being born in a garage, which both had like blue collar home brewing meanings, as well as like white collar entrepreneurship, innovation, technology meanings. And we launched a beer. It was the last project I actually worked on before leaving, called Garage Beer. That was supposed to be the beer that you stocked in your garage, that fridge in the garage that you have that had, that is just stocked with beer. It's supposed to just be a very light craft beer. And now a lot of people are making that, but this was kind of when IPAs and the double IPAs were all very trendy. Mm-hmm. We said, we're going to do this just very basic garage beer. The brand's going to be simple, white, gold, just very like kind of nostalgic. We launched it. It became our most popular beer very quickly. And actually, speaking of celebrities, with built-in distribution and audience, the Kelsey brothers just bought a majority stake of that beer. So really? Jason and Travis Kelsey are now promoting Garage Beer, and it is going extremely well. So that's wow. I agree with you there. It's good to have celebrity attached to any projects.
Wow, no, that's really cool. And I will say, as someone who I don't really as much now drink a lot of beer, but I really got heavy into that IPA space. And just blows out your palate. Everything else tastes like water. And I can now appreciate a really good lighter beer after kind of stepping away from the space a little bit.
Yeah, that's like the full craft beer drinker life cycle that you just see over and over again. We were seeing that as well. Okay, well, I could cool. spend several episodes talking beer and bourbon. So I'm going to have to hold the reins back on myself here a little bit. Let's jump into some of the work you do with Map and Fire. I think we spend a lot of time at the Juice talking about and thinking about content production and distribution, which is really like everything that goes into post building this brand strategy, this positioning strategy, doing the research. And then I think we jump on that production treadmill and we never get off of it, right? It's create, distribute. And we don't take time to stop and think about like, are we still creating the right things with the right perspective, the right point of view in the market? So maybe a two-part question here. Where should people start? And where do you traditionally have people start with kind of positioning as it fuels maybe a content strategy? And then the follow-up to that, what about people who are already running and producing and creating and distributing? How do you stop and like pull your head up and understand if you're still producing the right things or not?
Yeah, obviously, again, coming from a research first perspective, I would always advocate for starting with research, really understanding your customers on a deep level. And I think one of the misconceptions around research is that it's got to be this long, formalized process that takes months and maybe a lot of budget. And I think that just kind of scares people away from the idea, or at least makes it something that you just want to put off indefinitely.
Yeah.
I think everybody, for the most part, everybody agrees and understands, yes, we need this. Like, of course, we want to understand our customers better, but all of those obstacles tend to stumble us along the way. And in addition to just advocating for research in general, I think understanding that you can do some of this kind of work in a leaner way, and that it doesn't have to be this huge blown out process, but that you can run a survey, you can talk to 5 to 10 customers and get a lot of information out of that that'll help you. We're not trying to get all the answers. We're just trying to reduce the noise around the direction that we're going in. And especially early on, I think that's really critical because you have so many options. You can go in so many directions. There's so many tantalizing customer segments out there that you might want to go after, and trying to figure out who the best fit is for you and what you do uniquely well is so important. And I don't think you can do that. You either have to go through a ton of trial and error, maybe over the course of years, or you can do some research and try to narrow down that scope and try to narrow down that target a lot. So that's what I really try to advocate for. And again, I don't think this is something for big brands only or established brands only. This is for day one brands. I think this is something you really need to invest in.
We saw this play out at the Juice where it was like pre-product, pre-team building. It was just me at this point. And we started the Juice during COVID, which was an interesting time. And so it was just, we were kind of in this validation, revalidation stage of like, okay, we think this is what we want to go build, but we really wanted to validate it. And so I set a goal and this is when the entire world was remote and just jumping on Zoom calls left and right. I said, so I'm going to go talk to 100 marketers in 100 days via Zoom. But it was like when everybody's just like, oh yeah, I'm in my pajamas, I'll jump on a Zoom. Like, sure. So it was a bit easier, but it was interesting. Like, I'd say honestly, like 10-ish conversations into that. You know, I kind of had the same like interview script I was going through, but I wasn't leading the witness too much. They were pretty open-ended questions, but like 10 or 12 conversations into that, I was like, okay, I'm hearing the same thing like over and over and over again. So it's like, okay, I'm going to like compartmentalize that feedback. Now what's the next set of questions I can go ask the next 10 or 12? And like, it was kind of like this like very step-by-step process of like gathering feedback on one topic, and you just start to see patterns so quickly. I think you're right. I think you said like, 4 or 5 customer conversations. Like, I think everybody thinks their problems are so unique, but then as you zoom out and start to have those conversations, you're going to see patterns very, very quickly start to emerge.
Yeah, you hit on something really great there, which is that I would always rather limit the scope of one iteration of research and save time and budget for maybe a follow-up iteration. Like you're saying, like you've heard now some of this, you're already hearing some of the same responses to these questions. Is that triggering some new questions for you that you want to ask in a follow-up maybe, or a follow-up round? And there is research to show that once you're in that 5 to 10 range, you're going to start to get saturation around responses. You're going to start to see redundancy with responses. Like you said, even when you have what you think might be diverse use cases or individuals, everybody's business is of course different, but those themes will appear. And I think, again, you're better off being lean and trying to focus in on a smaller group initially, learn as much as you can about them, and then do another round in a month and save some of that time, as opposed to saying like, we're going to try to do 100 conversations or something. I think you're going to end up wasting time ultimately.
Yeah. So that's, I think, really good process and feedback for somebody who maybe hasn't launched yet or is getting ready to launch or building brand strategy. What about those brands that are already creating content or already have a brand strategy and they're doubting like, is this still right? Do we need to evolve, or do we just keep doing what we're doing? How do you kind of do that in parallel with already being up and running?
Well, we work with a lot of, I would say most of the brands we work with are up and running. They've been operating for, it could be anywhere from a couple years to, in some cases, a couple decades even.
Wow.
And we're generally coming in, and in a lot of cases, they still haven't done some of this foundational work. So part of what we're trying to do first is, and this is where some of the positioning work comes into, is let's assess the land a little bit and figure out what is working or what we know, what we think we know about our customers. I think that's often a trap too, because when you are in that cycle and you've been doing stuff for a long time, you start to make a lot of assumptions. You build up a lot of assumptions and biases around who you think your customers are and what they want to hear. And it's easy to kind of stay in that bubble of, well, we already kind of know.
It's comfortable. Yeah,
totally. It's safe. And you've probably seen some good results around certain parts of that. So it's not like it's not based in something, but at the same time, the world changes, the market changes, competitors change, even your own skill sets change. You need to be constantly checking in with those things and kind of revisiting what our strengths and weaknesses are and how that aligns with the market and our customers, because your positioning is a living, breathing thing, and everything's always evolving. So we try to come in with, if we're working with a brand that has been around a while, go through that process anyway. Let's go through that sort of foundational positioning process, almost like we're doing it somewhat from scratch. And in that process, we'll start to uncover some of those assumptions. We'll be able to ask some questions that maybe haven't been asked in a while or ask them in a new way. And that forces people to answer questions that they maybe haven't answered in a while, that have just been sort of baked into the thinking and baked into the team and are just sort of, like I said, just kind of like assumed things. Like we all get it, right?
Yeah. Institutional knowledge, like
exactly.
It's just assumed. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like institutional knowledge is sort of a double-edged sword. It's like there's a lot of benefits. You can save time with that, but it also can lead you into cycles of just sticking with the same stuff. Yeah. So we would want to come in and kind of go through that process together and see if we can make sure everybody's actually clear about what the strengths and weaknesses are of the brand, what that strongest positioning is, and then also validate that with some research, talk to some customers and see if what you've been producing from a content perspective still aligns with the challenges that they currently have. We were talking at the beginning of this, right before we jumped on, about how much the market has changed lately. Just in the past 6 to 12 months, there's been a lot of changes in the market. And, if you've last revisited your content strategy or your brand strategy 2 years ago, it might not be that relevant or valid anymore. So that's kind of where we would start, is let's go back to fundamentals for a bit and make sure we're really clear about why we're different in the market and what our strengths are, and then see how that aligns with our customers to help inform, content pillars and all that good stuff.
I'm curious, maybe as you, from the Map and Fire, your perspective, like, because you're doing research for, I'd assume lots of different brands at the same time across maybe several different industries, different sizes, but like, does that give you like a unique perspective into kind of like macro trends? Is there anything that's happening with, the rise of AI or the macroeconomic challenges that you're just kind of seeing across all brands, and like anything that you're learning from those challenges that everybody seems to be facing right now?
I mean, like you said, we are working with a diverse set of brands across different industries. And I do think there are a lot of advantages to that, because even just today, I was literally on a client call this morning, and they happened to be in the sort of the health and wellness space. And we were talking about another brand that we had worked with previously that was also in the health and wellness space. And that gave us some insights around for this specifically, it was like perceptions around like organic ingredients and, certain things like this, that they were kind of debating, like, does this even matter? Do people even care about this stuff anymore? Is organic still something that's top of mind for people, or is it kind of pushed aside for more trendy kind of like things that people might be more focused on? And what we have found through multiple cycles of research is organic still matters. It's sort of still this go-to thing that people in health and wellness or in, food and beverage spaces, like it's still this, it's this ingrained cornerstone of things that we just look for. It's not going to might not push you over the edge to buy a certain brand, but it's like an important check mark that you might look for. Yeah. So there are like sort of trends like that. I'm trying to think of some B2B trends that we've seen. Obviously, AI and kind of like just overall efficiency of work and tightening of budgets are all sort of intertwined in my mind right now. We did a research project recently with a company in the AI space, and it was really interesting to see the perceptions around AI with different demographics and how
Hmm.
people who are using AI for personal uses tend to be a little bit more focused on some of the integrity or like the
Hmm.
some of the value aspects of AI and how it's
Yeah.
being used. Whereas with the B2B audience that we looked at, they didn't care about those things as much. It
Hmm.
was a lot more about, can we get a certain task done?
Yeah.
And the other aspects, like the value judgment aspects of it, were very much secondary to, can I be more efficient? Can I save money? Can I get my job done quicker? So it's kind of interesting. I mean, AI is evolving so fast that things are constantly changing, but it's interesting seeing those perceptions. I think how the general population might view it versus how B2B people are seeing the value from it.
Even that organic example you gave is like kind of what you were talking about earlier, where it's like I could envision myself or any marketer sitting in a seat marketing an organic product saying like consumers don't even care about organic anymore. Like everybody's organic, right? But
Right.
it's like unless you go out and you ask the question, it's like, no, actually they do. Maybe it's the threshold to be organic or find organic is lighter, but it's like they do actually still care. And I think like I again, as myself included, and probably nobody get more guilty than me, but just like assuming we know our customer so well, but really, unless you go out and you have the conversation, those assumptions can be very, very dangerous, and especially when you start introducing topics like AI and technology and privacy and all of those things. I think it's best to go straight to the research and the quantitative or the direct feedback type of research than just sit there and assume on those topics.
I mean, what are you all thinking about with, I mean, you're obviously living and breathing content from so many sources.
So the story that we always share with AI based in data, what happened on our platform is when generative AI first was kind of introduced, like widely available via Chat GPT, I think it was like November 2022. I expected content about AI to be overwhelmingly the most popular content on our platform. And it wasn't. And it took about 3 or 4 months to actually see AI content start to trend. And it was then in the spring of that year, I think it was like April, where AI did become our most popular topic. And I was like so confused by that, like all of a sudden. But myself and our product leader, we were like, all right, let's figure this, like, what's happening here? We're like, did we do something wrong? Like, why is this happening? And we looked at the content that was being produced. And when ChatGPT first came on, all the content was like, how AI is going to revolutionize sales dev, how AI is going to revolutionize content marketing. Is AI going to take everybody's jobs? Like it was very like thought leadership type of content about like the future of AI and like kind of like sexy content there. But then what happened is I think we kind of got through that wave. And then in the spring, people started producing content that was how to use AI to accomplish a task, how to use AI to be more efficient doing X, right? And that's when people were like, oh, yeah, please help me with this. And the content became very, very popular. And it goes exactly to what you're speaking about. I think initially we were all worried about AI creating things. And I think we've kind of like rode that wave and realized like, okay, it's not quite there yet. Maybe it's good for like creating Q&A type of content, but it's not going to create quality content as we kind of all see it and feel it. But I think what it can be used for is operational efficiencies. And I think a lot of content that talks about that is resonating, as well as that's how we use it, right? It's taking podcast episodes and getting the transcription and atomizing the transcription, right? So that's right now how I think where I've kind of settled on AI. It's great for operational efficiencies. It's not yet creating things that I think are going to remove humans from those processes.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's interesting too to think about how the space you're in and seeing this continuously evolving flow of content, like how that sort of gives you this really interesting insight to markets and trends and perceptions of certain technologies and things, like just through what are the topics bubbling up. It's almost like hopefully a lot of these brands are doing their own research and which contributes to their content, which then you sort of become this
Yeah.
funnel for being able to interpret all that stuff.
I think for B2B content, especially, I always say like people don't want thought leadership like in B2B as much. The content that if you are trying to have content create business, they don't want thought leadership. That's how I should maybe phrase that. But
Mm.
when people are engaging with B2B content, it's most often because they have an acute pain point or a question they are trying to solve or answer, and they need it to help them accomplish something. And we see on our platform, and that opinion, I'm not smart enough to come up with that on my own. That opinion's formulated by what we see on our platform. That is, the things that resonate the best are templates and toolkits. They outperform any other content by a factor of 3x. It is anything that's like a how-to, and it is things that are specifically written for a job function. So a job title or job function, things that are specifically like written or created, or videos for, this is how to build a product strategy for product managers. That's a terrible example, but things that are like very specifically call out that like job function and job responsibility really resonate on our platform. So that's how we say, if you're creating B2B content, help somebody get their job done, and it's going to work.
Yeah, I've seen that same pattern. We have a newsletter with our brand, and of course, always testing out different subject lines and different types of content with that, and definitely see that same type of trend of that how-to stuff tends to be the thing that people want to click on and are most interested in. But I also completely agree with what you're saying previously about what AI is really good at and not so good at least up to this point. I think it's just really important to understand those differences, because you can use AI in so many different ways. It's almost just this like broad stroke tool that can be used for virtually anything. But if you're using it for the wrong stuff, I think you're getting led down a bad path, or your results aren't going to be fantastic. But if you can give AI really specific constraints to stay within, and certain sometimes more binary tasks to execute on, it's fantastic. It's amazing. I actually learned more about that because I launched a product earlier this year in January that's an extension of our positioning work. And it's a product that is meant to help with B2B companies assessing, evaluating positioning for their brand and looking at other brands, being able to compare and contrast. And we use AI for some of the analysis, but we use it in a really specific way where we're asking the AI to evaluate brands around very, very specific points of value and saying, how are they delivering on these very, very specific things? So it's not like a blanket, give us an evaluation of the positioning of this brand. It's like, we have a process we want to follow. Here's the process, AI. Here's the things we want to ask you about. And AI is good at doing that at scale as humans. Yeah.
It's, you created the process and like the kind of the thought that goes into it. I don't know. There's probably a better word for that. But then you're asking AI to kind of run the process more efficiently than you would otherwise be able to on your own. I think that's a great example of, I think, a really good application.
Yeah.
Well, cool. We always, in these conversations, putting you on the spot, what's an unpopular opinion you have as it pertains to marketing or content?
My unpopular opinion is that you should always get, and I know this is going to sound self-serving, but you should always get outside help with your positioning. I have heard some really smart people in this space, people who I respect a lot, who I think disagree with that, and who would often say, particularly for early stage companies, the founders should just handle it themselves. It should be an internal process. But my feeling is driven by two things. So one is that I think you really need someone who's been through the process a lot and actually has a process for it. I think otherwise you can end up treating it a little bit more like a checklist of just sort of saying, we need to answer these 6 questions. Once we've done that, our positioning is done and dusted and we're good. And you need someone who's going to push that more to get you to go deeper. And I think you need a process, you need experience to be able to do that really well. And then the other big point is you need an outside perspective. And that's the thing I think you just cannot escape from, no matter what stage of maturity your business is at, whether you're a startup, whether you've been around a long time, no matter where you are stuck with the people in the room who are all living and breathing that business 24/7. And that just creates blinders for people. And I think you need someone who can come in with fresh eyes, who doesn't have the baggage, who doesn't have all the biases, and just say, what you're saying sounds good, but I don't see it that way, or at least challenge it in some way. And for those two reasons, I just think you need someone, you need outside help. I don't think an internal team should ever try to do it on their own. So again, a little self-serving. I know that's I'm not trying to generate leads here. I'm just saying, I think that's what you need to do a good job with it.
It is interesting because it almost like it'll allow you to get the feedback before a customer or a prospect gives you that feedback, right? Like, because I think about that all the time, like in our own experience, like we hear from folks that are like, we see the juice everywhere, but we don't know what you do. And I'm just like, did you not read the website? They're like, no, I read the website. And I'm like, oh, well, then that is probably on us, right? Because we wrote the website. And how did we do it? We got in a room and we whiteboarded it, right? Like, yep. And I think you're right. Like you can kind of get that feedback before you get it in market, I think, from fresh eyes or fresh perspective, and from people who don't know you as well. I think that is really valuable. So I think that's a really interesting, really valuable perspective. And it leads nicely into what I'm going to ask you next. If somebody wants to work with Map and Fire to provide that perspective, or Clay, if people want to keep learning from you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can go to our website, mapandfire.com. We do have a ton of resources on there, a lot of free resources. I'm a big believer in giving stuff away for free, so you can absolutely access stuff there. And then I post on LinkedIn at least twice a week, so you can check me out, just Clay Ostrom. I'm trying to get better at creating more fun content too. So not just the serious analytical research and positioning stuff, but trying to find ways to make it more palatable. So hopefully if you check it out, you'll be entertained a little bit.
You've posted some good memes, some good like marketing memes. I have to give you credit for that. I do encourage everybody to go check it out because you are exactly right. You do give away a lot of really good frameworks. I was looking at your, I think it was a positioning hourglass a couple days ago. I thought that was really good for the stage we were at the Juice. So I strongly encourage everybody to go check Clay out on LinkedIn and go check out mapandfire.com. Well, we did it. We made it through the episode, and I believe that bottle of bourbon is still full. So we've accomplished that. Clay, thank you so much for joining us. To all of our watchers and listeners, thanks for joining the Content Cocktail Hour. Until next time, cheers. Thank you for joining the Content Cocktail Hour powered by The Juice. If you want to see more episodes or more resources curated for your role, join us on app.thejuicehq.com. See you next time, same place. Cheers.